Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. And if you're committed to working on your own development and helping those on your team or even in your entire organization to achieve their full potential, then you are in the right place, because I bring you guests who are focused on doing both of those things. And today I want to welcome someone that's really been doing this her entire career. So welcome, Amy Casciotti.
Thank you for having me, Meredith.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Amy. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. For one thing, because Amy is the Vice President of Human Resources at one of our favorite companies within my own company, TechSmith Corporation. And we've been an enthusiastic user of both their Camtasia and SnagIt products, I think, for over 15 years, Amy. So for a very long time, and they've served us so well. TechSmith as a company is a software company with a mission to empower people to create remarkable videos and images that help share knowledge and information. And Amy is focused on being an advocate for both the company and its employees, to ensure that TechSmith and its staff have the skills needed to continue to move the company and employee engagement forward. She's also a strong advocate for their customers. And what's really interesting to me is Amy has held a variety of roles across the company since she joined TechSmith in 1995. So, Amy, what I'd like to do is start out by having you tell us a little bit about your journey in TechSmith, because I think that's had an impact on the way you view your role in human resources and the way you carry it out.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with you on that. So I actually started off as an intern in 1995, and I was an administrative intern. So I was helping go through the mail or reply to a couple of emails that would come in. And it was just a handful of things that needed to be done. So it was only a couple hours a day. I had a computer at home that I used, but I never thought about a career in technology or that might be a place that I would end up. But I quickly fell in love with being at a software company, especially because I was the 9th person as an intern with the company. So I got to see a lot of how the whole company worked. So even being in an administrative position, I would start noticing, like, hey, over in our accounting department, it seems like you could use some help over there. Like, I have extra time during the day. Can I start helping out? And then next thing I know, it turned into a full-time job in our accounting department. While doing some of that, I was helping out with customer service. We had one tech support guy. So when he was on the phone, it was usually the others of us that were picking up the phone. So we try to help customers do tech support. And then slowly being in the accounting department, I noticed our controller was the person doing the HR function and maybe not doing everything that should be done. And since that was my area of interest in the college courses that I was taking, I had asked if I could carve out some time to start helping there. And he, of course, said enthusiastically, yes, please, I could use the help. I'm a finance guy, not an HR person. So I started doing that, and quickly I was doing it half-time. And this was right before 2000, and TechSmith was growing at quite a pace. And so I went to our president and owner and pitched the idea of a full-time HR role, given where we were. We didn't really have anyone focused on recruiting at that time, and that was something we really needed. And I'm really fortunate that he decided to take a chance on me with no previous HR experience other than what I had learned in school. And that was back in 2000. And since then, I've had the opportunity of growing our HR team. But because of my previous experiences within the company before taking over HR, along the way, I've also had IT, technical support, and customer service underneath me at times when that helped TechSmith out. And, having that perspective of the whole company and how the company works, how our customers view us, what our customers needs, I feel like really gives me a different perspective here in HR of what the company really needs to move forward and be supported in what they're doing and what things maybe don't make any sense for our business. And I'm definitely a lot more open and receptive to hearing from others because I've worked alongside them in various functions as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love that. And one of the things because you've grown with the company as it's grown so much, one of the things I have valued as a customer is the responsiveness. And to me, that says a lot about the company's values, because when they start at the top and they kind of cascade down, the way employees interact with customers has everything to do with how they are treated by others. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about what are some of the core values that TechSmith has adopted and not just stated, but actually lived by. And in particular, your CEO, Wendy Hamilton, how does she model them?
Yeah, those are all very great questions. So we have 4 values, and the first one is we put our customers first, acting with integrity. So it's that our customers are always top of mind in any conversation, decisions that we're making. And for some of us, our customers are actually our own employees. So that customers does not just mean the users of our products, but my customers are all of our employees here at TechSmith. So it's me keeping them top of mind in all of the conversations that I'm having. Also our users, of course, but it's also our employees that are being kept top of mind, and that we're not trying to pull something over on someone. If our products don't work for someone, we don't want them using our products. We will happily refund them and have them get something that actually works for their needs that they have. So I think that's the first value that really says a lot about our company. Our founder was integrity was a huge thing for him, and Wendy's the exact same way. She's a pretty straight shooter. So she doesn't, she's not trying, I'm trying to think of the right way. She's not trying to market something to get employees to buy into it. She wants to have very real conversations and hear concerns. And that kind of goes into another value of ours is inclusive decision making, that we want to hear all voices in a conversation to make sure that we're getting all different perspectives and ideas before we make decisions, and that so staff understands why we're making the decisions. We're not 100% on that every time. We're all human. We sometimes don't always show up at our best every single day, but we work really hard at that. And I think one of the ways Wendy, our CEO specifically, is she is very transparent about things she's thinking about, putting them out there on a Slack channel for our employees to respond back to. We survey our staff a lot about things we're thinking about. Flexible work, going from being fully remote during COVID to we built a building during that time, and having staff come back into the building and figuring out what was that hybrid world going to look like, and getting feedback from staff of what they wanted and needed. Also understanding what the company needed, but trying to keep both of those things top of mind in that process. Another one of our values is that we're all equal here at TechSmith, and we treat each other with respect. So we're a very flat organization. So even though I might be the VP of HR or Wendy is our CEO, we're coming into the conversation just as another voice and a viewpoint, not expecting that because of our title that has any extra bearing. Obviously, we might be in positions where we're the ones that need to make a decision, but we still want to have a conversation about that and hear from everyone in the room, not just hear ourselves talking.
Yes.
And then I feel like and then we empower each other to take accountability and responsibility as our 4th value.
That's great. I really like those. And I like the example you gave for Wendy in each of those, because too often companies, post values on the wall, create them. They go through the effort to create and state what they are, but to incorporate them on a day-to-day basis, like TechSmith has, I think is admirable. And I appreciate the thought that went into creating those and then applying them. And it sounds like then people feel comfortable speaking up we talk a lot about psychological safety these days. It sounds like those values create that kind of environment where people are willing to disagree if there's something that's put forth that they don't think will work. Do I have that right? Is that
Yes,
where the
and
way things are?
I think that's one of the important parts of that respect piece as well, is you can disagree, but are you disagreeing respectfully? And that's one of the things that we really try to enforce. And, again, we're not all perfect every day, and do sometimes people give feedback in a way that maybe the person didn't receive it in the right way, but we talk about, intent a lot. And do you know this person? Do you think that was their intent to give that feedback that way? Or was the intent in the spirit of trying to help you and help our customers and be better, as opposed to insult you or hurt your feelings? And lots of times when we have that conversation, the employee is usually like, yeah, I know Frank, like he doesn't mean it that way, that he's just trying to help, and he's got 5 things on his plate, and he was probably just quickly trying to give me that feedback instead of maybe framing it in the exact way that I would have preferred that he did.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Just thinking how much calmer a workplace can be when we have that approach. And when you know that the general agreement across all levels of the organization is we are going to be respectful of each other. And so you're not in fear of somebody attacking you, even though they may not be as diplomatic, as you say, as they could be. You don't assume the worst. You're giving them the benefit of the doubt. And then also addressing it with the person just to check it out and find out more about where they were coming from. To me, that's all part of this healthy environment. And one of the other things, because I read this wonderful white paper that you shared with me, you've created this Async-First environment. And I want to talk about that, especially related to meetings. But first, let's talk about, from your perspective and what TechSmith, what the intent was. What do you all see as the difference between synchronous and asynchronous?
So synchronous is, the way we see it, is conversation that both parties are present at the same time. So like when you're on a phone call or a Zoom call, as is this, that you both have to be present at the same time for the conversation to happen. And then we look at asynchronous as, it could even be a video, but just you don't have to be present when I'm sharing the video. You are consuming it at a time that works for you, that you're able to consume that information.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So as it relates to meetings, what was the thinking? I want to explore this process, because so much of the complaints we hear about from people is, oh, I just spend way too much time in meetings. I go from one to another, and a lot of it's a waste of my time. And you all realized something similar to that. What was the pain point that caused you to say we need to do something different?
Well, I think, going from being fully in person to remote overnight, and then being there for 2 years, we kind of tried to lift and shift what we were doing in person to remote, which means that we had a lot of conversations in the hallway and things with each other when we were in the office. And so we just moved all of that onto Zoom, and it was causing a lot of burnout, as I'm sure you could imagine. And I was one of the ones where, because I had multiple departments reporting into me, people were like, I can never even get time with you because you're in meetings all day long. And knowing we were looking at going back into the office, trying to figure out ways we could offer more flexibility for staff, we realized meetings were an issue we had to solve, that there are a place where meetings are the best thing for us to do. But there's a lot of times where we don't have to have a meeting. It's just sharing information or ensuring someone has time to take in that information so that they can give the feedback that we want or come up with the ideas that we're looking for. And so it was really trying to kind of rip the Band-Aid off of forcing us all to just really rethink what we were doing around meetings. And we actually found that, I think it was 8% of an 8% increase in people's view of the importance of meetings by doing that experiment, compared to before, where, those 8% thought that meetings were a complete waste of time. And then all of a sudden, when they couldn't have a meeting, or at least we made it a little harder for them to have a meeting for a month, they realized, oh, there are some instances where a meeting is really important, and it's really helpful to actually just get everyone in a room together.
We'll talk about that no meetings, because that's so revolutionary. I can imagine some people thinking a whole month with no meetings. How is that possible? So how was it possible?
So actually, that was a lot of the pushback we got at first. And we talk about putting people first. And this was kind of part of that process. We threw out there that we'd like to have, at first, the idea was that we would just do a week or two without meetings. And I actually pushed back on that of, hey, it takes 21 days to undo a habit. If we're going to do this, should we really go all in for a month? It also lined up with we, as part of our flexibility, have been looking to have 2 months of the year where we don't require staff to be in the office, to give them a chance to get out of the office, get some different perspectives without feeling like they had to be in here a day a week. And so July happens to be one of those work from elsewhere months. And so it kind of lined up to do those together. But a lot of staff was actually, we weren't expecting it, but freaked out at the thought of like, I can't have any meetings. And it was like, we're not saying you can't have a meeting, but we're asking you to really consider whether you need a meeting. Is there a way you can do this asynchronously? Like, and we were very clear that part of this is to figure out how we can offer more flexibility, not just on where you work, but when you're working. But if we all have to be in meetings together all the time, that one piece is going to be really hard because we had core hours. And we got a lot of pushback on those core hours. Well, if you want us to take away core hours, we have to figure out how to get this information to the places it needs to be in the company. And that's really how this started off. And we created a lot of resources for staff of like what questions to ask. You know, if you're worried about someone's well-being and you just want to get eyes on them, absolutely have a meeting. If it's a really contentious conversation you're having, like where there's someone took something the wrong way, we said, yes, have a meeting with each other, because when you don't have the visual communication of the nonverbal communication of what someone's saying, people tend to misconstrue what somebody is meaning when it's just words on a Slack message or in an email. But for the most part, we really challenge people to, what we are calling flip the meeting, send a video out with the information. And when the other side of the meeting has a chance, they can watch that information, sit on it, think about it, and then respond back to it. And we found that it's actually been a lot more inclusive to ensure that we're getting all viewpoints and all personalities are able to share. Because what was happening in meetings a lot is it was those that could think quickly on their feet were the ones that were able to share feedback or give input. And those that weren't scared to speak up in a meeting were the ones that were giving feedback. So now we're hearing from all the voices in the room instead of only a portion of the voices in the room.
Mm-hmm. You know, that makes so much sense. As I was listening, I was thinking about the people that really like to take time to reflect on what's been said. And if they feel pressure to give input, it won't be their best thinking, because that's not how they think. So what kind of differences have you seen in terms of the quality of the input that you get from different folks?
I mean, the first is actually hearing from more than the same few people every time, that you really are getting diverse perspectives and ideas shared. But I'm also hearing from others that they feel more a part of the conversations of various things happening in the org, because they do have a chance to think about the information and respond instead of here in this 30 minutes, hopefully they're able to process their thoughts. And given that we are a software company, over half of our company is in the engineering side of our house, which tend to be very analytical. They like to really be very thoughtful and intentional about what they're saying, whereas I might think off the cuff as I'm going. That isn't how they think naturally. And so I do feel like we're getting more of that technical side of the house, a chance to be a part of conversations where maybe they didn't feel they were able to be as much in the past.
Mm-hmm. So before you implemented this to reduce pushback and resistance, what were some of the things you put in place? Because I'm thinking what you share here could be applicable to any kind of a change that an organization wants to put into place. Meetings is one thing, but there are many things when we're trying to take a fresh look and we want to get buy-in. What did you do?
So one of the first things we did is first went to our senior leadership team to ensure that they were buying in with the idea of the experiment, because at the end of the day, if they didn't buy in, they were still going to have their meetings, and then the rest of the staff was going to feel like they still had to have meetings. But after that, it was meeting with our people managers to talk to them, hear their concerns that they had for their staff. But then we also went out to other influential individuals within the company, and it could be because they were going to need to help out with tech or figure out how to, so like our program management team that helps with project management, you know, ensuring that they had a voice in the conversation, giving that they're the ones that tend to own a lot of the meetings on our engineering side of the house. Just some of those really, you know, they might be quiet voices, but when they speak, a lot of people in the company listen, making sure that we were talking to them, explaining what we were trying to do, and really getting them on board before we rolled it out to the company as a whole. So we already had some evangelists within the company about trying this experiment.
And so what were some of the things you learned along the way during implementation of this? Because no experiment goes flawlessly, right? There are always some things that you learn from, data that points to, we better change this or change that. What are some of the things you learned?
Yeah, I think I kind of shared it a little bit earlier, but it was really that well-being piece of how concerned managers were of the well-being of their staff and wanting to, like, they were really worried about, because again, we were remote, having a touch point with their teams just to see how they were doing and how they were managing stress. So they were really worried they were going to have to get rid of that one team meeting that they had a week. And it was like, hey, if you guys talk and you all decide that this is the one meeting this week you need to absolutely have together, we're okay with this. We're not telling you you absolutely can't have that meeting. We're just asking that you rethink all of them and ensure that if you are having that meeting during this month, it is necessary for you to have that meeting. And I think that was some of the pushback that even I was surprised about, because to me that, I guess I didn't think that that would be a question. Like if you're worried about somebody, like absolutely, you're going to talk to them on it. But it was like realizing you really need to be explicit about some of those things, because our staff really wanted to know where were those guide rails. So just helping them figure out where those guide rails were, once they realized that, things went a lot smoother. But it was just ensuring that we had those parameters that we wanted them to operate within.
You know, that's so important, because whenever we put in place a change, we think we are clear on what we've said and what people will understand. But it's when we get those surprised looks or unhappy responses that we can realize, oh, this sounded an awful lot like an absolute, instead of there's some flexibility built in. So sounds like that's one of the things you definitely experienced.
Yeah, and our managers are very used to me saying, like, I don't like to write black and white policies unless I legally need to write a black and white policy. I prefer the gray because there's lots of situations that come up that we could have never imagined would be something we needed to handle. And we want to be able to do right by our staff and do the right thing. And if we've created this black and white policy, we can't do that. So it was even some of them being like, I know you don't want to have a black and white policy around this, but can you help me just figure out like where the gray is? And it's that reminder to me that like, yeah, even though it's not black and white, there's still like guide rails in there to help people make good decisions on their own.
Well, one of the things that I'm curious about, and I bet my listeners are too, so what means of communication were used? What did the async look like in action?
That's a great question. So we use Slack internally. So there's lots of information that if it's just quick sharing of information back and forth might happen in Slack. But we also use our own tool, SnagIt. It does video. So we do a lot, excuse me. We do a lot of just quick videos where we're sharing information that we would have normally shared in the meeting. And then we load it up to our screencast service that actually allows you to have threaded conversations within the video that link to whatever is being talked about, so that as our employees are able to watch the video, they're able to ask questions or give feedback or ideas on things right in the video. And then when the next person comes in, they're able to see what the people before them left and build on that conversation within it. And then lots of times we'll then either take that back into where somebody will come back with another proposal and we'll do that round again. And so a lot of it was actually using video in place of the meetings, but it was at the time that worked for the employee, not the time that I was able to find to schedule a meeting for like 10 people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I love that idea of using those video clips. Of course, you've got a product that does that. So I don't want to assume everyone was comfortable with it, even though it is your product. That some people have to learn, not just technically how to use it, but to get comfortable recording a video.
I think that was the biggest piece is I think it's pretty normal for humans. Most of us aren't comfortable on camera and don't like hearing our own voices. So some of our advice to staff was just do a one and done. You know, when you have a meeting, you stutter, you have to restate things. It's okay if you have to do that in the recording for your video. You don't need to re-record it just because you said one sentence in a way you didn't think was perfect or because you used an or a so here. Just share that out. It's supposed to be quick and dirty is kind of what we've been calling it. And I think after doing that a few times, you start to get used to it. And so like in my team, we use it a lot when we're thinking about ideas for policies of just sending in a video out to my team. Hey, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you guys think of this? What concerns do you have? What am I missing? And just having them respond back to that instead of us trying to find a time when my team's in interviews and various things. It could be 2 weeks from now before I can get all of us together. So for our team, it's really sped up that process and ensured that my team's still able to give feedback on different things that we're doing.
So when you send out a video like that, do people have the option of recording a video in response, or is there a place for them to write what they are thinking instead of recording it? How do they convey their responses?
Yeah, I think it depends on the meeting organizer or who would normally be the meeting organizer that's sharing the information, their preference. I personally tend to use SnagIt and then put it in our screencast service just so that the messages are going in line so everyone sees them. But some people throw a link to a video in Slack and then thread a conversation underneath in Slack. Others might send it in a video and then link out to a Google or Word doc to like have people add information in there. It really just depends on your own personal preference. And I know some companies, they might be pretty locked down. So it's also just depending on the different security policies of your company, what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, so this was last July that you did this experiment. And so now here we are several months later. Is it still an experiment or has it become the way of life there? And well, let's answer that one first and then I'll do a follow-up question.
So we are having meetings again. So we did allow staff to go back to having meetings, but I definitely am receiving a lot more videos in place of meetings, which I didn't actually until recently. One of our someone in marketing was just asking me how things were going from me. And I started realizing I have a lot of open time on my calendar that I didn't have a year ago, and starting to realize like, oh, some of those meetings that fell off my calendar during that month of experiment never came back onto my calendar. But I hadn't actually realized that until somebody had asked me that recently. I just assumed I had more time. I hadn't really thought about why. But yeah, I think my whole team has found it that there were some meetings that we were having that we realized we didn't need to have meetings for and have since gotten rid of them. I mean, some of it could also be because we actually have a building and we do ask our staff to be in 1 day a week. So now there is actually time to see each other in person. So that could be another piece of that is people are actually getting to just run into each other here in the office. But I think a lot of it is that we were having, I wouldn't say pointless meetings, but meetings that could have been the same outcome could be achieved in different ways than just
they
a
were
meeting.
Perceived as essential until you set up this experiment and realized they weren't as essential as you thought. Sometimes we just get into the habit of doing and repeating and not stopping to say, is this really necessary? So have you been able to measure? I mean, I'm thinking about you and the free time you have and thinking of that going across the whole company. Have you been able to measure increases in productivity or other results that have been a benefit?
So I feel like We've had about a 10% increase in perceived productivity from our staff since having done this experiment. We have, I want to say 85% of our staff have said that they either have or have a meeting, and I think it was have a meeting that they would replace with this more asynchronous model. But that's actually a conversation we're having right now, is what is the next iteration in this experiment to really see, like, what have we learned now here being close to a year out from this experiment, and what do we think would be like step 2 in this experiment to try. So that's a conversation we're actually having internally.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that sort of ties in with the last thing I wanted to ask you about. In the end of your white paper, you talked about people first and putting people first. And I'm just curious, what does that look like in general? And then specifically with this, in terms of figuring out what's next, how do you put people first in that situation?
Yeah, I think at least in my head, what we mean by that is, you can get technology and have it to solve problems, but if you aren't thinking about the people, how they work, how it's going to impact them, ensuring that they're comfortable with that technology, it's probably not going to have the impact that you're hoping that it will have. So we really say, think about the people first and the technology second. And we've really learned that lesson, maybe the hard way, in HR as well. I mean, HR used to be a very manual processes for everything. And now I feel like everything has technology to go along with it. And we're sending staff to one set of software here and another program over here. And so we've had to be very intentional in how we roll that out to our staff, how we train them on that. If they don't need these 10 features in our human resource information system, let's just show them the important things that they need and make sure that they get that down. And then if other things would benefit them in the future, great, we'll expose them at that time. But let's just give them what they need so that we don't overwhelm them, that they stop paying attention and don't use it at all. So I think that's really been a lesson my team's learned, but us as a company as well, is really thinking about the people, how they work, how they feel, how things impact them before bringing the technology into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amy, this has been such a great conversation. I love what you've been spearheading there at TechSmith during your time there, and especially in your role now as Vice President of Human Resources, and looking out for the people and putting them first. I want to commend you and everyone at TechSmith for the values you've embraced and you live by. And thank you as a customer for the great way that you treat us. So I think our conversation today is a gift to my listeners, because I think those that have been, of the mindset that we must have these meetings will start thinking differently about them based on your success story there. And I know it's a work in progress, but you've really done a great job of making things work. So I want to just acknowledge you and your team for making that happen. And also invite you to share with people how they can connect with you and learn more about the wonderful TechSmith products that I personally love using, and others in our company do too, Camtasia and SnagIt.
Sure. I'd be happy to have people connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Amy Casciotti, AMYCASCIOTTI. And then you can find out more about TechSmith at www.techsmith.com.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. And thank you again for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show, Meredith.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.